leadership, workplace mental health, entrepreneurship. This is Victory Leaders Lounge. Welcome to another episode of Victory Leaders Lounge. Today, I am here with Scottie Schneider. He's another Army veteran, and he's done a lot of really, really good things in the civilian world since he's separated, but he's one of those officer guys that we always talk about, but I'll let him share his journey now that he's doing bigger and better things. But Scottie, do you want to introduce yourself to the group and kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, brother, I'm definitely happy to. So don't hold it against me. I was an officer and a West Point graduate. I grew up in a really small farm in North Carolina and joined the military at 17. Spent 4 years at West Point, 3 years as an Army officer in Alaska. I was a lieutenant, so I couldn't land navigate. Got lost while snowshoeing at -40 in the backcountry. Froze off a toe and a half and some pretty bad neurovascular damage to my fingertips. So then I got out of the Army, and ever since then, the last 15 years or so, I've been starting businesses. I've been entrepreneurial. I started 2 of my own businesses, and currently I'm building a community for military veterans.
Yeah, Scottie, that's awesome, man. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now. I'd like everybody, especially in my audience, to know, what you're doing and kind of what that journey has been like, and what maybe the vision is for that.
Dude, I'd love to. I'll take you back a little bit in the story. When I got out in 2012, I had a pretty rough transition process. I was planning on being a career military officer, and now I've become very much not that. If you can't tell from my beard, tattoos, and long hair, I don't fit any mold of like the traditional West Pointer officer stereotype. But it was really rough for me because I was separated and estranged from my family, my birth family at that time. And you as well know that when you get out of the military, you lose your community, your family, your tribe, everything. And so here I am, this young officer that hadn't even completed his service commitment. Like, what do I do? So I just kind of defaulted to what I was told I should do, which is, get a nice job and a nice car and nice partner and a nice house. And I had all those things, and I was a functional alcoholic. I was just deeply unhappy because I didn't spend any time figuring out what I wanted to do with my life or what I should do. I didn't have any purpose. I wasn't giving back in any way. So in 2015, after spending a couple of years in the oil industry as a chemical salesman, I became fully entrepreneurial and digital nomad at the same time. So I packed all my stuff in a backpack, took off for Puerto Rico initially, and that ended up in me living in Medellin. So in 2015, late 2015, I ended up in Medellin, and it was still a rough transition, man. I was just not happy. I built a couple businesses, still not happy. Got married, still not happy. And it took me a long time to find plant medicines down here in Colombia, namely ayahuasca, bufo, cambo, and wachuma, or San Pedro. And for the last 4 years, I've been training as a medicine man, a healer, in those traditional techniques, holding space for people, building fires, the whole thing, and working with a lot of veterans along the way. And one of the things that I realized in my own healing journey, it took me so long to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and to actually be happy. And helping so many other veterans along the way, I realized there were some pretty fundamental problems that we're all facing. Lack of community, lack of direction, lack of identity. And we're all dealing with some amount of challenges or trauma from our past. And so I decided to do something about it because the rate of veteran suicides and the number of veterans that were coming down here and still dealing with these things just became overwhelming for me. And I just had to do something about it. So I started this organization called Waking Warrior. And the idea is to help veterans, specifically and currently focused on male veterans, although I'm looking to find a partner and establish a female side of this. But right now, for male veterans to connect with each other, to find the help that they need. I'm running a podcast, and the purpose of that podcast, very similar to kind of what you're doing with Victory Leadership, is that people heal in different ways. And I want to be completely agnostic as to how people heal. I want to showcase, like, if you did therapy, amazing. If you went to church, amazing. What did you go through? Tell me your story, and how did you heal from it? So the ideal goal is that we can get our veterans the help that they need and point them towards resources of people that healed in the specific ways that they want to. So that's the general general gist behind Waking Warrior. And my prayer is that it grows and that people that need help come, and people that can help others also come, so that we can come together as a community and tell our story and stop shoving all this stuff inside.
Yeah, it's definitely not healthy. So I want to hear a little bit more about these the medicine man stuff, that you found, the ayahuasca, and I can't remember the other stuff that you said, but that's only
Yeah.
because I only have an attention span of like this much. But tell us a little bit about what that does for the healing process. I'd be really curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say like two things right off the bat. The first is that it's not for everybody. If you have psychological challenges like or schizophrenia, those sort of things, it's probably not for you. So it's not for everybody. It's a healing modality that works really well for I would say a lot of people, but not everyone. And the second is it's not a magic pill. The indigenous, and I'm talking about particularly the indigenous in North America and also in the Amazon basin and a lot of places in this side of the world, think of medicine and healing a little bit differently. So the Western approach to medicine is pretty typically, oh, you have a headache, take an Advil. And the indigenous approach is a little bit more like, okay, well, why do you have the headache in the first place? Let's look at that. Maybe you're dehydrated. Maybe you should drink some water. So the medicines, when I say medicines, I'm primarily referring to, let's just stick with ayahuasca. It's one of the most commonly known. A lot of veterans have used this very successfully to combat PTSD and depression. And there are actually entire charities and nonprofits that will send veterans down. I think Healing Hearts or Healing Heroes is one of them. Anyway, these medicines really take you into your psyche in a way that it's very difficult to access otherwise. And the idea there is to show you different perspectives of things. So, for example, if you're going through some PTSD trauma and you don't really want to kind of go back there, the medicine might show you that, but also show you a different perspective of it so that you can put it in context. So it's a way of navigating through these challenges in our lives. And the medicine, when I say we, the traditional healers, consider it as a guide and as a teacher. So it has like a spirit of its own. It has a
Yeah.
mind of its own in that sense. And so it can really help us navigate, understand, and heal from a lot of these challenges that would be very difficult to heal from otherwise. And it's probably best used in combination with other modes of therapy, like traditional talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, men's groups or women's groups, these sort of things. Because, like I said, it's not a magic pill. So the idea is that you go into the medicine experience or the ceremony and you take something back to change your life. And if you don't change your life after a ceremony, well, then you kind of wasted your time. We say the real work begins, 90% of the work begins in the ceremony of everyday life, which is I learned something from this experience and I'm going to change the way that I do things. Like maybe I'm going to stop drinking alcohol. That would be a good example.
Okay. That's interesting. I might want to talk to you more about that offline,
Yeah,
just
for
because,
sure.
I suffer through things. We had a podcast where we talked about these things a little bit, but in addition to that, I spent like half of the day today just completely out of commission because I had woke up with a migraine headache. And so I
Oh
think
no.
I'm not the only one in that boat. I think a lot of veterans probably suffer through those on a regular basis, especially when they have a TBI, which a lot of people that served during the Gulf War and the Iraq and Afghanistan war, because of them just lobbing mortars on the base all the time and going on convoys and getting hit that way. It's just a very common thing to happen. But it's interesting. So I think we're gonna have to talk a little bit more about that. But
Yeah, let's do it. Let's roll.
but so what led you down this path? I know you told me before we started the call today that you had some other entrepreneurial journeys. What led you down the path that you are now? I know you obviously care for veterans, but I mean, there had to be something that triggered that thought to get you there.
Yeah, I dealt with quite a few things. It wasn't like the functional alcoholism was a cover up for the deep lack of satisfaction that I had in my life. And I tried a lot of things the first thing that I tried, as I mentioned, was, okay, well, I'll get a good job and I'll get some money and buy all the things that I want, and that'll help. And it didn't. And then one of the next things I tried was traveling. And what I realized then that I would travel to a different place and my problems would still travel with me. So like, okay, that's not helping. And then I tried the traditional route, get a family and support get married and support the father and mother-in-law and do all of that stuff. And then by accepting my traditional role as the male, as the man in society, that would help me work myself out of my problems. And that just ended up throwing me into a year and a half long depression.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lot of things going on here. I was separated from my family, my birth family, that is my mother and father. And I had just exited my first business, which didn't end in the way that I wanted it to. And so one of the other things that I had tried was, okay, well, maybe I need to be an entrepreneur. Maybe being an entrepreneur will help. And then just, buying a yacht or like getting to $50,000 a month will do it for me. So I actually built a software product in my basement. I taught myself how to code. Actually, Andy Seymour of Inventive Technologies offered me a full ride veteran scholarship to learn how to code in Austin, Texas. And so I would work in startups during the day in marketing, and then I'd ride a little scooter like 45 minutes north, and I'd learn how to code. So I learned how to code, then I built my first software business, and within 8 months, I had accelerated it to $50,000 a month in revenue, and most of that was profit. I was like, I made it. This is exactly what I was looking for, and that didn't work either. So I was trying all these things, and it just wasn't working, and I realized that I needed to go deeper. And my buddy Jonathan Lang, he was a cavalry scout, and he had been in Medellin for a couple of years before me. He'd been coming here on and off since like 2012. And he and I met at a movement gym. So I knew that one of the things I needed to do to get myself out of this depression was move my body. So I met him at a movement gym, and he introduced me to traditional medicines. The first ones I tried were mambe, which is coca powder. It's like the coca leaf, toasted and powdered, and then put in with an alkaline substance, tree bark, or various other substances depending on what tribe you're going to. And rapé and also ambil. So the rapé and ambil are both tobacco medicines. And the first time I tried them, I'm like, man, you're crazy. Like, I would never do this again. This is the worst feeling ever. And he said, well, you should try ayahuasca. And I'd heard a little bit about it, but I didn't really know about it. So I took his advice and tried ayahuasca, and then that opened the doors to everything else. And yeah, I mean, there were a lot of times the years before, I mean, I was suicidal at least twice. I remember kind of standing on top of a hotel building in Santa Marta, Colombia, and I was like, I should probably just end this. And there was some little voice in my head that said, hey, you've got something to offer. And if you don't do something drastic, you're not going to get to that point where you can offer it. And so change your life and do it immediately. And man, I was down to like 15-minute increments throughout the day. I was so depressed, so like on the edge of actually ending my life, that at like 15 minutes, I would have a pencil stuck in my teeth, because I knew that by forcing myself to smile, it would change the brain chemistry. And the next 15 minutes, I'd be doing jumping jacks and push-ups. And the next 15 minutes, I'd be listening to Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins to change my mental outlook. And then the next 15 minutes, I'd be working at a customer support job. So I got myself through some very difficult times. But what I wasn't able to do was figure out how to prevent those times from coming back. And that's where the plant medicine came
in. Wow. So, no, I mean, that's inspiring. I mean, we've all had those moments where, and it's hard for some people to understand that, one moment you can feel suicidal, and then you just have that aha or no shit moment where you just see the world completely differently because you found something that's great. But, suicide is just, it's one of those things where you don't actually want to do it, but you want to do it, and you don't really see another way, but that you'd like to see if there is another way. So maybe tomorrow will be different. And then, I think the people that finally, and you could ask these questions over and over, because there's no good, bad, right or wrong answer for the people that end up committing suicide. Because I have plenty of, I would call them brothers and sisters, who went through with it. And I always I struggled asking myself these questions over and over again. Why did they actually do that? Because they never seemed like they would be that type of a person. But I think in my mind, what finally gave me that aha moment to find their justification was that, they went through with it before they found the justification not to.
And yeah, I think a lot of it is like, we don't feel like there is anyone to talk to. And the people that might be willing to talk to us, we may not feel that they're capable of understanding our experience.
True.
Which is why I think it's so important to have veterans that you can call. And there's also a thing, like, I sort of feel that sometimes we get a bit addicted to our own suffering. right?
Yeah.
We're suffering, and we know that we could do things to go get help. Like we could walk into a church, or we could call a friend, but we almost kind of don't want to do those things for one reason or the other. Maybe it's survivor's guilt. Maybe it's just once you get in that framework, like when you're depressed, like you just don't want to get better. That's kind of the thing. So you almost need like this external force or kick in the pants to get out of that. For me, it was the fact that I was supporting a family and a wife, and that if I didn't do that, if I didn't move myself out of my lethargy and depression and sleeping into like 2 in the afternoon every day, I wasn't going to be able to provide for them. And for me, that wasn't acceptable. That's what one of the driving forces for me out of that was, because I was actually, there are other people in my life that I'm responsible for supporting. If it was just me, I mean, I probably wouldn't be here.
Mm. Well, and that's interesting, but I kind of use the analogy. Oh, I see. We've had up to 3 people watching this, by the way. So if you're here, feel free. If there's a question you have for either one of us, or if there's a comment that you have about anything that we're talking about, to please put that in there. We don't have these conversations to hear ourselves talk. We these podcasts are actually there so that we can provide a benefit out there to people, and hopefully get someone to reach out to us if they have a question about entrepreneurship, or maybe mental health issues, or especially workplace mental health, which is a problem that I try to solve. And so please, if there's something that resonates with you, keep the conversation going, and put a comment there. We'd love to hear from you. But anyway, so you know very similar journey. You and I started my business. My activating event was that my brother passed when he was 35 years old. This was like 4 years ago, and maybe five. No, it's five now. But I was kind of down and out before that, and I realized at that point, when I saw everybody else around me, that he that I had something to offer. Everyone else buckles under the pressure, while I tend to step up. And I think that's just because I that 18 years in the military, I'm just relying on my training. But obviously there was something that happened like that for you, and thankfully you had people there that you were supporting. But I would like to know, so you started this journey. How did you actually just like pick yourself up from the bootstraps and start? I mean, I just
Yeah.
people struggle with that moment. I agree with you that the stuff that you were talking about earlier, where people get addicted to their own guilt, they get addicted to their own depression, they get addicted to their own anxiety, and they tend to kind of live in their own little bubble, and sometimes even want people to feel sorry for them, and it gets to be just this self-fulfilling prophecy. But it takes a strong person to get out of that. I'd like to hear what you did, or maybe what event hit that said, you know what, I'm going for it.
Yeah, I'd say there were like three distinct phases, kind of crawl, walk, run.
I
So
like it.
crawl was back in 2017, and that was when I was ready to end my life, like jump off of a hotel building. And that was the
Mm,
crawl phase, because it's like, well, I need to just survive. It was simply survival at that point. And whatever that little voice was in my head, or my guardian angel, or spirit animals, whatever it is, um, it motivated me to do whatever it took to at least get back to the place where I didn't want to end my life. So that was the crawl phase. The walk phase was when I was passing through this year and a half long depression. This was a couple of years later, like 2019-ish. And because I had my family there, I started to, after about a year and a half of like doing nothing and just kind of like limping along, I was like, look, I need to get hard with myself. Like there are most of the times you should be patient with yourself and loving and gentle, but there are times in which you need to like have a no shit Sherlock talk with yourself. And that was one of those times. And so I was doing some research on the issue and area of depression, and I realized that it could be a mental imbalance, but it was probably likely due to something that I was not doing in my life, or some things that I'd been through, etc. And there was probably things that I could do to get out of that. So I was listening to Jordan Peterson one day in one of his old lectures, and he was like, "Hey, I'm a clinical psychologist, and when someone comes to me with depression, I ask them what they ate in the morning, because your diet has a huge effect on your brain chemistry. And then I asked them what time they woke up in the morning, because your circadian rhythm also has a huge impact." And my eyes just like flew open. I was like, holy shit, there's like a list of things that I can do that will change the way that I feel. And so I made this promise with myself. I'm going to create a list. I called it the anti-depression checklist. and I'm going to do the things that are good for me, and I'm going to try it for a month. And if I recover and if I'm not depressed anymore, then amazing, I've succeeded. If not, I'm going right to the psychiatrist and I'm asking for the brain chemistry modification pills, you know. And I did the list, and the list was pretty basic, you know, work out every day, stretch in the morning, do some meditation. It wasn't even like an hour of meditation, it was like 5 minutes of meditation. Daily progress towards something that mattered towards me, physical contact with people that I loved, and a walk in the sun every day. That was basically it. And then like no alcohol and clean eating. And lo and behold, a month later, I was like happy again. I was like, okay. And so every time over the course of the last decade that I've felt that depressive tendency kind of creeping up again, because once you've identified it, you can see it coming from a mile away. You're like, oh, I don't want to be there again.
Yeah.
Then it's because I'm missing one of those things on the list. And so that's kind of also a bit of the driving reason behind Waking Warrior. Eventually, I'm going to be launching a coaching program that's going to take veterans through the process of finding that out for themselves. You know, the different areas of diet and sleep and connection with spirit or cosmovision or God or whatever your higher deity is, even if that's yourself. The idea of your career direction and happiness and personal relationships. If something in your life is not going well, if you're not feeling well, it's probably a lack of one of those fundamental systems. And so these things like ayahuasca, like meditation, like church, these are all wonderful tools and modalities. But at the end of the day, we have to do the work ourselves. So that was the walk phase. And then the run phase was when I started taking plant medicines. And there was a really interesting shift that happened here. So within plant medicines, I was able to look at the background symptoms of why I was depressed and dealing with anxiety and challenges in my life, and why my relationships weren't going well, because it showed me a lot of the trauma that I'd gone through with my family and in the army as well. And most specifically, a lot of times we think about veterans facing trauma because they went to war and they saw someone blown up, for example. But there are a lot of other veterans that didn't have those same experiences, but still have traumatic experiences. So, for example, for me, it was training with a year and a half with my mortar platoon to get injured and sitting on crutches on the side of the tarmac as I watched them load the plane and fly off to Afghanistan without me. And I felt like such a coward. I felt like just because I hadn't deployed that I had tried to somehow subliminally or subconsciously get out of it. And that took me a long time to get over. So the plant medicine showed me that. They brought me back into my relationship with my parents and what happened to me as a kid and different things here and there. And then the shift happened when I think at some point you start to feel like what it's like to be healthy again. Because when you're not healthy for a long time, you forget what it's like to be that way. And so then you start to feel healthy and happy. And then you're like, okay, well, actually, it becomes easier to do all these things that are good for me. And then there's a change in your mind that happens when you realize, okay, I've kind of done enough work on myself. There's stuff that I have to work on, obviously. I'm never going to stop that process until I die. But now I kind of have to start giving back to others. And that's what happened with me. And so I started giving back by serving in the ceremonies, sweat lodges and ayahuasca ceremonies, and started playing music. And now I'm serving in a more direct way with Waking Warrior. And I can't tell you to anyone that's listening to this that is not happy with their lives, it is very difficult to tell you what it's like to feel being happy with your life and waking up in the morning with a smile on your face. There are so many things that unlock about our human experience in our lives, our creativity, our hobbies, our connections with people, our genuine care about them when we're not so locked up in the stuff that we're dealing with.
Mm.
So if there's anything that I can do to help people put those burdens down and start living, that's what I'm here to do.
Well, and so I have a regular viewer on almost every single one of the live shows that I do on LinkedIn and Facebook, and it's Michael. And so he he's
Hey,
admitted
Michael.
this more than once, but he said he struggles with depression, anxiety, and procrastination. And oh, by the way, I know you're married, so you probably don't procrastinate near as much as you say you do. But when we're married, we always are told that we're procrastinating about something. That's probably a normal thing, Michael. But with the depression and anxiety, I hope that some of the stuff that we shared today and we share on the Warrior Leadership live stream that we do, and all these things that we talk about all the time, I hope some of these things resonate with you, and you could reach out to somebody like Scottie or Derek
Absolutely.
or whoever the case may be. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you feel comfortable with that person, even if it's not using their services, buddy. I mean, good Lord. And then, by the way, anybody who's listening, just having conversations, joining a men's group, whatever the case may be. He said, I procrastinate and gets on my, and when she gets on my butt, I stop. Well, good. You know what? Hey man, that's called built-in accountability. We have to have built-in accountability. Sometimes we can't be accountable for everything. I mean, sometimes we only have the bandwidth to handle so much every day. And then, when we have somebody like a wonderful woman behind us, that's why they say behind every great man, there's an even better woman. Well, that's because they give us that swift kick in the pants to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do, not just what we think we should do. So that's the story behind that, in my opinion. But
yeah, I'd say it's. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go for it.
No, please go ahead. Add to it.
I would say one of the things that really, really like that the way that I see the world, we definitely have to have patience for ourselves with the process of healing and becoming better people. And it's very difficult to see when we're in the middle of it how the incremental progress that we're making, just a little bit every day, just make yourself a little bit better every day. It's very hard to see how that stacks up over time, but it's kind of like money, so like compound interest.
Yes.
So you wake up one day and you see that as long as you try to do something just to make yourself just a tiny little bit better every day, 1% or less than 1%, you're eventually going to get yourself out of it. So I think if we're talking about the dynamic inside of a family, it's very important for us as men to be able to lead ourselves. So obviously, it's okay to get corrected by your wife every now and then, but ideally we're leading ourselves and we are accountable for everything. Whether or not that's possible is up for debate. And have patience for yourself in that process, but do your best to be accountable for everything would be my suggestion.
Correct. We could do our best. And you know what? That's why it's good to have that extra person there. It's just like going into business by yourself is very, very difficult. Sometimes you need a second set of eyes. And I feel like that's what my wife provides for me. I know I hold myself accountable for as much as I possibly can, but I can only think for myself and I can only see what I see. And if part of that getting better, sometimes she'll say certain things that annoy her. And, that's just, I think in every relationship there's nagging, but I know there are certain things that she harps on me about on a regular basis that just make me open my eyes and see that there's more than what I am seeing. And that's important too. And in a business, it's the same way. That's why it's hard to start it by yourself. And I know, Scottie, you have a couple other people that you're starting Waking Warrior with, and perspective is important. But I always tell people the difference between complaining and, bringing an issue to the table is that when you complain, all you're doing is saying about something. But problem solvers don't just bring the issue to the table, they bring a potential solution, and then they open it up for discussion. So that's the difference. I mean, holding you accountable, that's great, but please discuss these things if that's really what gets you down most of the time, and make sure that you're having conversations about it. It's the hardest thing to do when you're in a marriage because you got to pick your battles. I know that your spouse probably has to pick her battles with you too, because when two people live together, there are a bunch of things that go on in the house that just sometimes make it hard. That's why it's important to have faith or whatever you believe in to make sure that you're working hard to keep things going. But Scottie, I appreciate it, man. I enjoyed being on your podcast. By the way, that was a difficult one for me because I had to give a bunch of myself, and you shared a bunch here with my audience and a little bit of your audience as well. That you had to give some of yourself that during our first conversation you didn't necessarily do either. But
it gets easier with practice.
It does. And, if I'm ever going to get up on stage and say it, then, I have to be super comfortable with it. And I think that, my goal is at the end of this, sometime this fall, I'm going to be working with a lot of the schools within about 50 miles of here. And I'd like to be saying these things to seniors because
I think that's going to be wonderful.
Well, it's important because I grew up in an area that I was not I did not come from a successful family. And if I can rise above that, people need to hear, because when you're in it, you don't see a way out. But
Correct. And kind of like what Michael just said, like you said, my problem is that I don't see the progress quickly enough and then I stop. So part of this is like I mentioned, it's so hard to see the progress incrementally. You have to kind of zoom out and get at a 30,000 level view. And so
yeah.
if you know you're doing something that's good for you, then keep doing that and don't stop, even if you don't see the immediate progress, because it's good for you, period. And that's going to get you out of it, at some point anyway. And I wanted to say, JJ, like when you were on my podcast, it was a really beautiful example, a really wonderful leadership example. Because what we don't see a lot in our society, it's this like concept of, oh, we got to be strong and tough. And a lot of that we're taught in the army, a lot of that we're taught in terms of how we should be as men. But vulnerability is also strength. And it sets a very powerful leadership example for you to be able to dig deep and to share those things that were uncomfortable for you about your experiences. And that sets the example. So thank you for being a leader in that, because that's very important and very needed.
Well, thank you. And you as well, by the way. People that sit on their thumbs and don't do a damn thing about it are the ones that, should be hearing these things, because they know that they need to find out that there's another way. And that way is by not sucking it up and driving on, but by facing the things that are bogging you down and then taking massive action to make change. And that you can't make your life better unless you do that. But you're my guest. So what I do at the end of my show is I ask my guests if there's anything that they would like to share about leadership, entrepreneurship, or anything that they would like to share with my audience.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll tackle entrepreneurship at a brief level first. At some level, entrepreneurship is just a process of experimentation. And it really requires a deep understanding of who you are as a person and where you want to go and who you want to help. If you start a business like I did, my first business I started, I wasn't connected to it at all. It started making $50,000. I wasn't able to hold on to that level of money, and the business ended up, getting acquired, but not a great deal for me. You really have to understand what you're doing it for, and ideally be doing it for something other than just the money. And then the other advice I would say is just experiment, take some risks, because what's the worst that happens? You fall flat on your face. There's this great book by Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, called How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. And so in it, he kind of makes this example of, okay, well, how tall are you? Like 5 feet, 6 feet? Okay, well, just try to fall forward, and then you've at least advanced 6 feet. So if you advance, you can cover a mile. You just fall enough times and you do it in the right way. And so it's very difficult often as entrepreneurs to not judge ourselves based on our own perceived success, or where we think we should be based on the success of others. And I would just say, if you're an entrepreneur, keep at it. Make sure you take care of your mental health, obviously, and do things that are good for you, and remember why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. And then on the leadership aspect, something that's really, really important to me. They taught me a lot about leadership at West Point, but I've learned more in the last couple of years with plant medicines about leadership than I ever did at West Point. And for me, leadership at a fundamental level is an invitation to others by the way that you live your life to ask you why you are the certain way that you are. So live your life in a way that causes others to stop and ask you, like, JJ, Scottie, why do you have a smile on your face all the time? Like, why are you doing all these good things? What did you do to get there? It's like, okay, well, like, I can show you how I got there, and like, I'll help you along the way. And for me, that's leadership. That's servant leadership. And so I guess that's what really drives me. And so whenever I encounter challenges, or I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, those things happen, obviously. I always look first, how is this reflecting on what I'm doing with my life? If I'm angry that someone is not being very truthful with me, am I being true to my word, and am I living in integrity? So pointing that spotlight on myself first, fixing my own life, and then going out into the world and spreading that example. So I hope that inspires someone, and if I can help in any way, please let me know, because my entire life at this point is dedicated to service and helping humanity as a whole raise our level of consciousness, be nicer to ourselves and to others, and take good care of the earth and the resources that we've been provided with.
Wow. Yeah, good message. That's important. I like
I'm a hippie. I can't help it.
well, well, I like specifically, and I preach this too, but I think the biggest thing that I struggle with and a lot of people struggle with is don't compare what you want your success to look like to what somebody else's success looks like, because it's not going to look the same and you're not going to have the same journey, and the path to get there is going to be completely different as well. And so, you know, you got to celebrate your wins, not in the way that you think other people won, but in just the little things that are making you better every day.
I would say just don't compare yourself at all ever, right? Because happiness doesn't revolve around a comparison with what someone else has. Like happiness for you looks completely different than what happiness looks like for me. And it goes deeper than that. Like when I say don't compare anything, like we really compare ourselves a lot in areas that we don't really even expect. Like there's a lot of comparing trauma, right? So, oh, well, I don't have as much trauma as someone who, was in a very intense combat zone. Like, so we compare our trauma, we compare our happiness, we compare, like, just don't compare in general. Like, focus on what you need to do to be happy and what makes you happy. And then once you're rooted in that, nothing else can shake you.
I agree. I agree. As a matter of fact, a lot of combat vets get that way. I remember when I was, and I know we got to wrap things up. I usually keep my show at 30 minutes, but this is important. So I'm glad you brought that up. When I was in Virginia, I bounced around from group to group. I couldn't stand my therapists. Well, my therapists. I went through a few of them before I was actually happy with one, and then turns out she didn't listen to me and screwed up my paperwork, and I told you about that on our podcast. But you know, when I found the right group, it was because I went in there and they weren't judgmental. I went to so many other groups with some Vietnam and some Desert Storm and some Iraq and Afghanistan vets that when I told them that I retired as a transportation warrant officer, immediately they thought to themselves, oh, he was a pogue or a fobbit or whatever the case may be, which, you know, was not accurate. When I started telling my story, you could see people in the background just having these judgmental looks. And so I went to those groups a couple times and I left. I was like, you know what? I don't want to be where I'm not wanted. So I bounced around until I found the group that wanted me, and it was a disabled American veterans group in Virginia, which was absolutely wonderful. They were all there just to have fellowship and to help people through their journey. And I know that's exactly what you're trying to do right now. So I applaud you for doing that.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, I won't say anything else because I know we have to wrap it up, but we could talk for hours.
We could, and that's okay. But thank you, Scottie, for being a guest on my show. To everybody who's listening, he's a great person to reach out to if you want to discuss any of these issues that we talked about during today's call. But more than anything else, he has business experience. He has experience as a military veteran, and he works with all kinds of people, and he's made himself available to study different modalities. And my goodness,
if I can't help you, I'll find someone that can.
He's resourceful. That's right. So
that's how we roll.
That's how you roll. And I want to put a plug out for this. I try to do this once every podcast, but please go to Amazon.com and search why organizations should develop their leaders. I wrote a tiny little book and I published it about 6 months ago. It'll fit in your portfolio, your glove compartment. And my gosh, just buy the doggone thing. It has some tips and tricks in there and for leadership that you're not going to say after you bought it, no, that was a waste of $7. You can do that at Starbucks, but you're not going to do that here. So that's all I have. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Scottie, please stand by. I'd like to chat with you after the call is over. But thank you, everybody. Man. Michael, thank you always for participating, buddy. You're a supporter, and I love you for that. But take care. This is another episode of Victory Leaders Lounge.